Hi everyone, Ashley here and welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I have a really fun, pretty long video because I'm going to be showing you how I made 5 different cards using the same stencil. And I'm going to be using some different color combinations with the same stencil so you can get 5 different looks using one stencil, which is really neat. I had so much fun making these cards. I just sat down in my craft room and spent hours just testing out different color combinations to use with this one stencil, and I really love how you can get, again, very different looks from one stencil and you can really stretch your supplies. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm using a fall stencil today, and my first combination is going to be traditional fall colors on white cardstock. So I am starting with this panel of white cardstock. It is the size of an A2 size card, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, which is going to be the size of all of the panels that I'm blending on today. I'm using this stencil for all of my projects today, and this is a new stencil by Fawn. It's part of their fall 2021 release, and it is the Fall Leaves background stencil. And as you can see, it's a 2-part stencil, which means that some of the pattern is on the first stencil and some of the pattern is on the second stencil. And when you merge them together, you get a beautiful pattern that covers the full panel. So for each of the examples I'm showing today, I'm generally going to be blending a different color combination through each of the steps of the stencil. So one color combination for the first part of the stencil and one color combination for the second part of the stencil. So for this first example, I am just showing, again, some traditional fall colors. So here I'm just tacking my panel onto the first stencil. So this is the first of 2 stencils that I'm going to be using for this example. And how I do this, and I'm going to do this the same way in every example, is I turn the stencil over and then put my panel onto it face down and then tape it down from behind. Then when you flip the whole thing over, you get the stencil attached to the panel with the tape in a way that doesn't impact the pattern. So it's actually hidden behind the panel, which I think is a really nice way to kind of attach your stencils to your panels when you're blending. Now again, for this first example, I'm using traditional fall colors on white cardstock. So that is reds, oranges, and yellows. Now for this first stencil of the 2-part stencil, in this example, I'm using 2 different red shades. So Fired Brick is the darker red, and Abandoned Coral is the lighter red. And I'm just using my blending brush to blend these on, sort of trying to get rid of some of the excess ink in between the colors. And I'm just kind of doing this a bit haphazardly. As you can see, there's not really much pattern. I'm sort of just blending on a bit of the Abandoned Coral onto some of the stencil and then blending it out with the Fired Brick, trying to get both colors onto each of the leaves that are part of the stencil's pattern, just so that each leaf has a little bit of a dual tone to it. When I'm done with that, I can peel back the stencil, which of course is always the best part of this, and you can see that half of that pattern is there. And of course the second half of the pattern will come in when I use the second stencil. So to use this second stencil with the set, all you do is you line it up through the stencil so that the pattern is in the perfect spot. There's a couple ways with this particular stencil that you can tell. There's a couple lines that are meant to overlay onto some of the leaves, and then there's a couple berries that are meant to overlay onto some of the branches. So you can kind of just peek at these particular things and just make sure that they're nice and lined up, and then you can tack your stencil down. And again, I'm doing it the same way where I'm taping it from behind while the whole thing's upside down, then I can turn it back over and everything's attached and ready to go. Now for this example, the second stencil, I'm using an orange and a yellow and blending them together. For the orange, I'm using ripe persimmon, and the yellow is mustard seed. And by the way, in all the examples I'm doing today, I'm going to be using Distress Oxide ink, which I love Distress Oxide inks. They're some of my favorite inks, especially for blending. They blend so nicely and they leave this really chalky effect, which you'll see in the examples has different effect depending on which kind of paper you use. So again, you'll see that throughout the video. By the way, I will list all of the colors of Distress Oxide ink that I'm using on all of these examples down in the video description below. So if you want to sort of recreate any of these patterns with the same colors, you could definitely do that. Just check that description. Okay, so I'm applying these colors in the same way as I did with the reds, just kind of blotching on the yellow and the orange, trying to get them to overlap on the leaves so that you get that nice blend. And I must say that these colors, these particular orange and yellow shades, blend together so nicely. It was so fun to do this. And then when you pull that stencil back, you can see that that pattern is now complete, with half of the leaves being sort of a mix of dark and light red, and half of the leaves being that orange and yellow blend, which is really beautiful. So that is the first example. That was traditional fall colors on white cardstock. Now for a direct comparison, I'm going to move on to the second example, which is the same traditional fall colors on KRAFT cardstock. So for this example, I am not switching up the colors. We're going to be using the same 2 red shades. Again, that's Fired Brick and Abandoned Coral on the first stencil of this 2-part stencil set. And then on the second part, the second stencil, I'm going to be using again the same orange and yellow. So that's again ripe persimmon and mustard seed. But this time it's on KRAFT cardstock. I think this is the scientist in me coming out, because when you're taking science classes and you're running experiments, they always tell you that to make a comparison between 2 different situations, you have to make sure that there's only one difference between them, so that if there's any changes in the outcome, you can definitely know for sure that it's because of that one change that you made. So I think I had that in mind when I was sort of designing this idea. I really wanted to see, without switching any of the colors, what happens when you just change the cardstock from white to KRAFT. What is the difference in effect that you get? And you're definitely going to see quite a difference. I actually think I might prefer the KRAFT, although I do tend to generally have a preference for white cardstock. I just think that these colors look so beautiful on the KRAFT cardstock, and the Distress Oxide ink also comes across a little bit different. It's almost more vibrant on the KRAFT cardstock in a way. I think maybe it sinks into the white cardstock a little more and sits on the surface of the KRAFT cardstock a little more. I'm not 100% sure on that. That's just what it seems like to me. Okay, so this is a close-up of this example, and you can see what I mean about how vibrant those colors look on the KRAFT cardstock. They're so pretty, and especially for fall. So here's a direct side-to-side comparison. Again, the same exact colors, but on the left, of course, is the white cardstock, and on the right is the KRAFT. And you can see the difference in effect. The KRAFT is just more earthy, more autumnal. I just love it. It's so pretty, I think. Okay, on to my third example. So again, using the same stencil, but this time we're using muted fall colors, again on KRAFT cardstock. I stuck with the KRAFT cardstock. I just loved the look for fall, but this time, instead of using those traditional fall colors, we're going with very muted colors, almost more masculine. So for the first stencil, I am blending together 2 shades of brown, a dark brown and a light brown, with the dark one being walnut stain and the light one being brushed corduroy. So this is nice because it creates kind of like a tone-on-tone effect with the brown ink colors on the tan or brown colored cardstock. And again, this combination is just a bit more masculine, so I thought that would be nice to have as an example. I've now overlaid that second stencil, again kind of lining up the pattern, and this time I am blending on a brown vintage photo, so a different brown, and a green peeled paint. But this is a very muted green. It's not bright. It almost is like a browny green, so I thought it would be really nice to just add a little pop of color into this, but nothing too crazy. You know, green for leaves is very expected, so I just thought that it would be a nice way to add a little touch of color to this muted background. So here again, I'm showing this example up close, and you can see how pretty those brown and green colors are on that KRAFT cardstock. Like I mentioned, this is definitely a more masculine color palette, and I think it came out really nice on the KRAFT cardstock. Okay, on to my fourth example. Now this is an example using non-traditional fall colors, again on KRAFT cardstock. I'm on a bit of a KRAFT cardstock kick, I'm really loving it. And I just wanted to see how these really bright and fun non-traditional fall colors stood out on the KRAFT cardstock. So I'm starting with a blue and a green mix. For the blue, I'm using salvaged patina, and for the green, I'm using cracked pistachio. And again, just blending them on in a similar way that I've done with every other stencil so far, where I'm just sort of trying to get a little bit of each color onto each leaf so that especially the bigger leaves have a blend between the blue and the green. And then when I move on to the second stencil for this example, I'm going to be blending together a bright purple and bright pink. The purple is Wilted Violet and the pink is Kitsch Flamingo, which is one of the newer Distress Oxides, and it's one of my new favorites. It's so bright and pretty. These colors also blend together really, really nicely, and whenever that happens, it's just so fun to blend them. I was having the best time doing this. I definitely encourage, if you just want something relaxing to do in the craft room, I find stenciling so relaxing. There's just something about putting in like what I consider to be pretty minimal effort and then getting this beautiful, beautiful result out of it. So this is the final product for the non-traditional color example. I love these bright colors. They're really not fall at all, but with that stencil and the leaves, they can kind of become fall, a really sort of bright and magical fall. So I really love this one. It actually might be my favorite. Okay, and as the last example, I could not do one of these videos without having a rainbow example. Rainbow is one of my favorite color combinations, which I don't even think that technically is a color combination, it's just rainbow, but I love it. So this one I'm actually blending a little bit differently. And what I'm doing is I'm starting with the first stencil and just blending the colors on in a diagonal stripe. So I'm not really going in blotches. I'm not trying to get different colors onto each leaf. I'm just blending in a diagonal stripe, starting in the top left corner with the red and working my way down to the bottom right corner with the purple. And I'm going to do the exact same thing with the second stencil. So you'll see here when I put the second stencil on, I'm going to line it up so that the pattern lines up where it's supposed to be. And then I'm just going to take the same colors and go down with the same pattern. So again, starting in the top left corner with the red, working my way down in a diagonal pattern to the bottom right corner with the purple. By the way, all of these colors are colors I've used already in other cards examples so far, but again, they're actually listed down in the description if you want to see the exact names. Okay, so the fun reveal, when you pull back that stencil, you see the finished pattern with both stencil patterns filled in, and you get that beautiful rainbow pattern sort of working its way from the top left corner down to the bottom right. And it's really nice how the colors blend together where the colors change. And that's sort of enough of a blend you get. Each leaf does end up having different colors blended. Okay, so that is the 5 different examples of how to use one stencil with different colors to get different looks. I used a mix of white and craft cardstock with a whole bunch of different colors, starting with the traditional fall colors on both white and craft, then some muted colors on craft, some really bright and funky non-traditional fall colors on craft, and then finally some rainbow on white cardstock. And I really love how you get different effects whether you use white or craft cardstock, and of course you get different effects with the different colors with, ranging from sort of traditional fall, muted to bright. So now we're going to turn these backgrounds into cards, and I am starting with the traditional fall colors on white cardstock. I'm using a lot of products from the new Lawn Fawn Fall and Winter release for these cards, but really the great thing about this is that you could use any products you have and use the same techniques that I'm showing in this video. So you could use any background stencil, try a bunch of different colors, see what you get, see the different effects, and then once you're done, just turn them into cards. And I think I had a lot of fun with this because it really encouraged me to try and be creative with my card designs also. So not only are you creative with the colors you're choosing, but you're also creative in how you turn them into cards. And I really tried to make each one unique. So for this first one, I'm taking this beautiful background die. This is a background leafy frame die. It's probably not called that. Just check in the video description below for the exact name. But this is by Lawn Fawn. I cut it out of some green cardstock, and then I just splotched on some brown and green ink just to give it a bit of a distressed sort of autumnal effect. And that's just going to layer on top of my stenciled background. For the sentiment, I cut out a banner out of mustard cardstock, and I'm just stamping the sentiment onto it from a thank you stamp set, again by Lawn Fawn, that says, "For being my friend," and that is going to go with sort of the bigger die cut sentiment that I've already die cut out of some brown wood grain cardstock. You can kind of see it off to the right there. It says thank you. I actually cut that out of brown and white, and you'll see in a moment I use that to create a bit of a drop shadow. But first, I'm just going to glue this frame onto that panel, which I've already glued onto an A2 sized card base. So the frame will just overlay that leafy background that we stenciled. Like I mentioned, I die cut this word thank you out of a new Lawn Fawn die. First out of 2 pieces of white cardstock and then out of a piece of brown wood grain cardstock. I'm gluing the 2 white pieces together first, and then I'll glue the brown wood grain piece on top, and this just adds a little bit of dimension, kind of making these die cut words seem like a real sort of thick piece, which I think is really nice. So after I've glued all those pieces together, I can put some glue on the back of the whole thing and just stick it right down into the middle of my card, straight on top of everything, on top of the panel and on top of the frame. Finally, I put a few foam squares on the back of this banner, and I can line that up right beneath the die. And this one's done. It's a fairly simple card when it comes together, but it actually does have a lot of detail because of the intricate die cut and the intricate stencil design behind it. So there's a lot going on in this card, but it really wasn't too difficult to make. Okay, on to my second example, and this is the one where I used those same traditional fall colors, but I used craft cardstock. And for this one, I added a little bit of fun stencil paste to the design, which I'll show you now. So for this, I'm just taking the second stencil that was part of that 2-part stencil set, and I'm lining it up exactly so it covers over the pattern. Then I'm taking this jar of gold stencil paste, which is again a new release by Lawn Fawn, and it's this beautiful, beautiful bright gold color. I've never used it, so you can see the top is nice and clean, but I'm just taking my applicator tool here, my palette knife, stirring it up a little bit, and then all I'm doing is sort of taking a little bit and just carefully placing it onto a few of the leaves, taking care not to cover the whole leaf because I didn't want to cover up sort of my inking design, but I just wanted sort of a nice gold accent on some of the leaves. It almost looks like a gold foiled effect. I got this idea actually from Shari, who did it first in a Lawn Fawn video on the Lawn Fawn YouTube channel when they released, I believe, the stencil paste. They made an instructional video showing how to use them, and this was one of the ideas on one of the cards she did, and I just loved the way that it looked. I thought it was so neat, so I wanted to retry it for myself, and I really love how it comes out. It just adds sort of this nice shiny accent to some of the leaves. And of course, because this is a two-part stencil, we're not covering all of the leaves. There will be some that had been inked from the first part of the stencil that are not going to get gold from this. So it's kind of nice because it doesn't cover up all your inking or really too much of your inking. There's still a whole bunch of leaves that don't have any paste on them, and then there's a few that have some paste on them. So this is what it looks like when it's just been inked. I am going to go ahead and put that aside to dry while I prep the rest of my card elements, and then I'll come back when I'm ready to start assembling the whole card. I will make a quick note to make sure that you rinse off that stencil as soon as you are done with the stencil paste. I left mine for just slightly too long. As you could see, I was just showing it to the camera, my finished panel, and even that amount of time, it a little bit dried on and it was a little bit tricky to wipe off at that point, especially because the stencil's so intricate. So if you're using stencil paste, rinse it quickly. I'm working on the sentiment now for this card, and I again cut out a little banner out of some mustard cardstock, which I think is just such a nice fall color, and I stamped out part of the sentiment onto that. And now I'm stamping the rest of the sentiment, which is this word gratitude, and I'm stamping both of these in that same Fired Brick Distress Oxide ink, which is that really nice sort of deep red. Now I cut a vellum circle and I'm stamping part of the sentiment filled with onto that vellum circle in that same Fired Brick ink. Then I can cut out the word gratitude using the coordinating die. And so the overall sentiment will say filled with gratitude. I don't actually end up using the rest of the sentiment that I had stamped onto that banner because I just felt like it was too much, so I'm going to end up just saving that for another card, but yeah, so it'll just be the filled with, which was stamped onto the vellum circle, and then gratitude, which is this die cut word. I also die cut 2 fall wreaths, which is another new Lawn Fawn die, out of 2 different colors of sort of fall colors of shimmer cardstock. One is sort of a more orangey peachy color, and one is a deep red to kind of match with all of the deep reds and orange going on in this card. And you'll see how I assemble those into the final card in just a moment here. Okay, so now the assembly. I'm taking my stencil panel, which has now completely dried from that stencil paste application, and I'm using some liquid glue to glue it down onto an A2 sized card base, which I cut out of KRAFT cardstock just to match. Now here are those 2 fall wreath dies, or die cuts, and I'm just gluing them together sort of offset so that you can see some of that orange peeking out from behind the red. Then I'm taking the whole thing, turning it over, applying some glue, and then using that to glue onto that vellum circle, which just sits right behind. So then you can see that sentiment filled with coming through the vellum circle, and then I'll just glue gratitude right on top, and then I'll glue the whole thing down onto the card. I like adding sort of this vellum into the circle of this fall wreath because it sort of just allows whatever's within it to stand out a little bit from the background, but it still allows the background to shine through a little bit, so it doesn't completely cover it like a piece of white or KRAFT cardstock would, or any solid cardstock would. So I really like using vellum to sort of soften complex backgrounds like this. So I'm just centering that word gratitude over top, and you can see here is this card complete. The sentiment says filled with gratitude, and it's on that beautiful fall wreath, which is on that beautiful background. So I really love how this one turned out too, and that gold stencil base really does shimmer in the light. Okay, on to the third example, turning it into a card. This one you can see the design is actually quite similar to the card we just did. It uses 2 fall wreath die cuts, cut out of slightly different colors, but on this one I am stamping a different type of sentiment into the center piece of vellum. I'm using the circular sentiment. This comes from another stamp set by Lawn Fawn, and I stamped it onto that piece of vellum using some Versamark ink, which is a sticky ink good for heat embossing. I then put some gold heat embossing powder onto that and heat set it off camera so it becomes really nice and shiny when it melts. I'm doing the same thing here with these 2 fall wreaths where I took the brown one and just overlaid it slightly onto the green one. Slightly offset, I should say, so you see some of that green peeking out from behind. Then I can glue the whole thing down onto the vellum circle and then glue all of that down onto the card front. Again, you get the similar effect here where that vellum sort of softens the background, but still lets it shine through. I'm just taking that whole stenciled piece and gluing it down onto another A2 card base. This is a KRAFT card base to match with the panel. And then I can take my liquid glue and just put it all over that wreath as well as some areas behind the sentiment and then glue that down. Of course, you do want to be a bit careful with liquid adhesive behind vellum because you might see through it. So just trying to stick it where there's already something that will be covering it, like behind the sentiment. So this is the final card for the third example. Again, it's sort of similar in design to the one I just did before, but I do like how these colors are a lot more muted and they would be perfect, you know, to give to a man. They're very masculine, so I really like that one. Okay, on to my fourth example and turning this one into a card. I have to say I think this one is my favorite. It is so not traditionally fall themed at all, but I just love the colors so much. Okay, I'm using more stencil paste in this one. So this stencil paste is called Fairy Dust. It's from Fawn, and basically it is a clear, glittery stencil paste. So it doesn't look too clear when you apply it, but when it dries nice and clear, and it allows whatever colors are below it to shine through. So I'm doing a similar thing here where I have lined up the second stencil with the pattern that I had stenciled from before, and now I can take my palette knife and just apply some of this Fairy Dust stencil paste over top. And for this one, I'm just going ahead and applying it over the entire panel. I'm not really caring to only cover part of it. I'm just going over the whole thing in one thin layer. And this is because this paste will dry clear. So I wasn't too worried about covering up too much of my inking. I knew that the inking was going to show through even through the stencil paste once it dries. So I just went ahead and covered the whole thing by taking little bits at a time and just spreading it out with my palette knife until I had covered the entire panel. And you'll see when I pull this stencil back in a moment that it just covers exactly where those leaves were. It covers the pattern exactly. And then once I put it aside to dry and I come back with it, you'll see how it dries and how shimmery and clear it gets. Now I will say the stencil piece is a bit, I guess I put it on a bit thick. It's liquidy, so it did cause a little bit of warping of the paper when it dried, but as you'll see in the final card, it wasn't a problem once I sort of glued everything together. Okay, so moving on to the next element of this card, I knew I wanted a die cut word, thanks, and I wanted it to be in similar colors to what I had used to blend onto the background. So I'm just taking a small piece of white paper and blending on that purple and pink ink, sort of blending back and forth to get a nice ombre. And then I'm taking more of that Fairy Dust stencil paste and just going over the whole thing. So this will leave a thin layer over an entire rectangle piece, and I'm going to put that aside to dry. Once it's dried, it'll be clear and sparkly, and then I can take my thanks word die and just cut out the word thanks from that panel, and then that way I'll have a pink and purple ombre glittery word thanks, which is super fun. So this is a really nice way to get die cut words that are glittery using your stencil paste, but of course still have that color shining through. So I put that aside, and now I'm going ahead and working on the die cut shape, which is going to be the focal point of this card, which was that cute mug that you saw at the beginning in the picture. This mug, again, is another new die released by Fawn. I think it's called Lovely Latte, and it's just a die for a mug shape. I blended a panel of blue and green ink, the same blue and green that I used on that background, so Cracked Pistachio and Salvaged Patina, and I used that mug die to cut out. I'm also using the background of the mug die to cut out a piece of white, and the detail mug die to cut out all the details in white. So this die does come with two different pieces. It comes with the background and the detail piece, and the idea is that you take the background piece and then you take the outline from the detail piece, which I'm doing now, and then you glue it straight down onto that background piece. And this creates almost like an outline for a puzzle, where you can then take the interior pieces of the detail piece that you cut out of your colors, which for me was that blue and green piece, and sort of slot them in where they fit, which is really, really fun. So now I'm just slotting in those blue and green colored pieces into my puzzle that I created with the outline and the background. And you can see that it's starting to form this blue and green cup. Now, for the eyes, I cut that piece out of black as well, so that I would have black eyes and mouth, and this just helps them sort of stand out. Otherwise, they sort of just blend in a little bit too much, and I wanted them to stand out. The die set also comes with a little piece to put into the inside of the mug, I guess at the top there. And so for this, I just took a piece and colored it with some Copic markers in some very light browns. I just wanted it to look sort of like a milky, frothy latte, so nothing too dark, but still a little bit of brown or cream color to it. And then I can take that piece and run it through my die cutting machine, and you'll see it cuts out this really cute pattern with a little heart and some little sort of like patterns to the froth, I guess. So once I'm done with that, I'm just gluing it straight into that slot exactly like it should be, sort of like a puzzle piece, fits right in. And then you have that nice detail inside the mug as well. So this is what the final die cut looks like. I think it's so cute. I can't wait to make more cards with this. I did forget that, of course, that lovely latte die cut also comes with this other little piece to the die, which is just two little ovals which act as the cheeks. So I just cut those out of a little piece of cardstock that I'd colored with some pink markers to add the pink little cheeks to the mug. Okay, I'm just finishing up the sentiment by stamping out a few letters onto a white banner. The letters spell out a latte, so that the entire sentiment will be thanks a latte. So similar to what I did before with my die cut, I cut out a couple layers from white, and now I'm gluing them together along with this topper piece, which again is cut from that glittery pink and purple ombre piece, and that will be on top. And this will just add some nice dimension to the piece. So once that's all glued together, I can start assembling this card. I am taking my stencil panel and gluing it down onto a KRAFT card base. You can even kind of see as I'm gluing this that there was a little bit of warping there from that thick stencil paste, but I'm just holding it down really tight onto the card base, adding lots of glue and holding it with my hands for a while, and doing that was enough for me to get it to be nice and flat. I then took this thanks die cut as well as the banner, and I just put a few little pieces of thin foam strips behind it so that it has a little bit of elevation, and I'm sticking that straight down onto the card. I also put some foam behind the little mug, stuck that down as well, and then this card is complete. Like I said earlier, I think this one is actually my favorite. I love how cute that mug is, and the sparkly colors are so nice in real life. Okay, on to the last example here. We're going to be turning this rainbow piece into a card. This one's a fairly simple card, so it'll go by quite quickly. So let's get into it. For this piece, I cut out a few pieces ahead of time. I cut out a rectangle out of vellum, which, like I mentioned before, is just a really nice way to soften a complicated background and allow things on top of it to stand out a bit more, while still letting you see through to that background. I also cut out the big sentiment. This is a Lawn Fawn die, which says thanks so much, which I think is really pretty, and I cut that out of some black shimmer cardstock so it really stands out. I also stamped this cute little mice and colored him in off camera, and now I'm just stamping out a little sentiment to go with him, this tiny little speech bubble and the word thank you inside. So the mouse is also saying thank you, which I think is really cute. Once I fussy cut that little speech bubble out, I can start assembling the card. So I'm just gluing my stenciled panel down onto a white card base. This is just an A2 sized card base. And once that's glued down, I can then start assembling the rest of the pieces together. I'm taking my thanks so much die and I am gluing it onto a white piece that I also die cut. So for this one, I'm just offsetting it a little bit when I glue them together so that I have a little bit of a drop shadow, which helps the sentiment stand out a little bit more. I figured because I'm putting it on such a busy background, this would really help. Next, I'm taking that little mouse and I'm gluing that mouse, him or her, into that big hole in the O of the word so. This is such a good place to have a little critter popping out. It's such a big sort of space between the letters, so it's really cute. Once that's done, I can just take a little bit of liquid glue behind this whole die cut and glue it right down onto that vellum rectangle. Then once that's done, I can take some glue behind that sentiment again onto the vellum and glue all of that down onto the card panel on the card base. Again, just be careful with vellum, don't get too much glue anywhere where it won't be covered. Once that's done, I can just add this final little detail with that speech bubble, and that is it. This is the final card and the final example I'm going to show. So that is it. That is all the cards I'm going to be showing today. I really hope that you enjoyed watching this video, and I hope that you got some inspiration for how to use your stencils and kind of extend their life by really just testing out different ways to use them in different colors. So this is that first example with the traditional fall colors on white cardstock. This is the second example with those same fall colors, but this time on KRAFT cardstock, and of course I added some of that beautiful gold shimmer paste, which you can see, or stencil paste, which you can see shimmering in the light. This is the third example, which again is on KRAFT cardstock. Very similar design in the card to the second example, but this one uses much more muted colors. My favorite example is the one that uses non-traditional colors with a sparkly stencil paste and uses that adorable mug die cut as the card. And finally, this is the rainbow example. on white cardstock using a big Thanks So Much die to finish it off. And I really love all the different looks you can get from the same stencil. It's so much fun. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you are still here 30 minutes in, thank you so much for sticking around. If you do want to see more of my cards, make sure to head over to my Instagram account, which is linked down in the video description below this video, or feel free to check out some of the other videos on my channel. I do hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye!